switch to the next slide.
I think you just go in and isn't there control over here? And then change it. Yeah, I thought that actually.
Very easy to see. Yeah.
Well, it's a background image, right? It's the same kind of same color as the.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's time.
Give them. All right, good morning, everybody. Let's get going. Let's get going. If we have a volunteer for note taker, that'll be great. Otherwise, it'll be left.
The chairs have decided to relieve you of that too. All right.
Okay, it's Thursday by now. You should have seen the note well. Otherwise, please take a look. It still applies even though it's Thursday. We are going to spend most of our time on with the editors going through the latest changes, major changes to the main protocol in preparation for working group last call. We will also, during this part of the session, we will have 10 or 15 minutes to speak about Adrian's human rights considerations, somewhere near 11 o'clock. Then we will want to discuss working group next steps, specifically, do we feel we're ready or almost ready for working group last call? What do we do with the main protocol, and what do we do with the resource server protocol? Anything else for the agenda? All right. So with that, Justin.
Control here.
I think that's it, right?
Yeah. Is it? Oh, it says it's loading.
Oh, wait.
No.
Oh, is it the wrong deck again? And Fabian should be online, I think.
Take it back.
Okay.
I am.
And change the deck.
All of this
Yeah.
technology is just.
Right.
Yes.
It's kind of amazing when it works. There we go. All right.
You want to? I'll take ground. No. Good.
Yeah, I was going to say we should make sure that Fabian is online because he can.
It is online.
All right, fantastic.
I'm here.
He's,
Hello,
oh,
everyone.
fantastic. Great. He and I are going to be trading off for the editor's update. So I need to request it again. Technology, it's wonderful. Thank you. Good thing authorization is easy, right? All right. So hi, everybody. Welcome to the GNAP meeting on IETF 115. And I was inspired by some of the other presentations this week to include a local picture with some very rough Photoshop this morning. So thank you to the chairs for helping me get that in at the last minute. So everybody mind the GNAP. I know it's a little early for this pun, but I love it. Just deal with me. Anyway, today we're going to be going through the core changes, the changes to the core document, which there have been a lot. Fabienne and I have been really busy over the last couple of months. We're going to be grouping these into the editorial and the functional changes like we always do. There have been no updates to the RS draft, but more discussion about that a little bit later. And as the chair's mentioned, we'll be talking about sort of the features of the GNAP protocol and sort of where we go from here. So first off, if you pull down the slides, all of these links are live. You can go look at the RFC diff between the two to see the difference in text changes. We have merged 23 pull requests on core and 1 on the resource server draft over the last few months. Like I said, we've been busy, been a lot of changes. And we have closed 55 issues, 56 if you count the one that Fabienne closed this morning. That leaves us with, at this point, only issues in the core draft that have come up after we published draft 11. What was that, 2 weeks ago? So we were able to go through it. This is the biggest news. We were able to systematically go through every single issue in the tracker, decide sort of what needed to be done, you know, and execute a resolution for all of the outstanding issues, including all of the issues that have been labeled in the draft as, like, you know, editor's note, go think about this, go take a look at this from the very beginning of the protocol. No closed issues on the RS draft. We've opened up a couple of more because, as you'll see, some of the some stuff has been shifted in that direction. Okay, on the functional side, and I'm going to go through each of these in more detail. We have finally added key rotation after talking about it and how we might do it for a while. We've got text on cross-user authorization, sort of more concrete text on cross-user authorization. We have made some normative changes to the syntax, but it's really ways that makes it more consistent within the protocol. So you get the same kinds of structures between similar things again. We have finally gone in and added an IANA section, including extensive guidance for how extensions to the core protocol would actually work. If you want to go and build something new and build on top of this, what is our intention as a working group for the extension points and how to exercise those extension points. And some smaller issues, including noting that all URIs are intended to be absolute. We just actually had to spell that out. That's pretty much that entire issue. We expanded the error messages and the syntax around those. That actually also fits into being consistent with the syntax between different types of objects. And there's an expanded bit on RS first discovery. So the editorial changes, once again, we've expanded the security considerations. This has happened to every single revision over the last year or so, which you might expect for a security protocol. We've explained class ID, updated some definitions, and we have finally included interoperability profiles, which is our way of doing mandatory to implement considerations. Because GNAP is such a sort of broadly reaching protocol with lots of different use cases, the mandatory to implement considerations are, if you are doing this kind of application, this is what you expect. If you're doing this type of application, here's what you expect. We've added 2. We could probably use some more in the core document by the time this hits final, but you know, this is the current approach. We've added a list of implementations and would like more. And we've done a lot of cleanup on the document itself. So there were some sections that we thought we were going to add, but never actually did. And so we've cleaned up a lot of stuff in the core text. Fabienne, you want to talk about the JSON schema?
Yes. Hello, everyone. So yes, it was planned for a long time. It was an outstanding issue. And what we decided to do is to actually not put that into the core document, but on the GitHub wiki. The main reason for that is that it's actually very lengthy. And so it's something that would add a lot of length to the text, which is already quite long. And so we wanted to just add some resources for developers and implementers so that they could actually simplify their developments. So the nice thing with JSON schema is it's actually completely integrated with our way of approaching the GNAP protocol, because everything is based on JSON. And so you can actually understand the model. It's kind of a nice summary of the data model for GNAP. And then on top of that, you can actually implement verification at runtime for your different data that you're exchanging. If you're interested into more about that, you've got the jsonschema.org resource, which is quite nice. You've got a rich set of tools for, well, pretty much every language out there. So you can actually generate code from that. You can test with some data and see whether your schema is fine, and you can verify at runtime. We're actually using the latest draft for that. We need a bit more test along the line to actually make sure that the different settings are fine, and it's actually implementing the verification that we need. In some cases, it's not so easy because we've got some required sections, but which depend on some specific conditions on what you intend to do with the protocol. So that's the kind of thing we need to tune. But in general, you've got the request and you've got the response, which are already available here onto the wiki on the GitHub for GNAP core protocol. So overall, I think it should help you and provide some guidance for implementers. And we'll expand on that over time. So that's this part.
Commenting as an individual and actually putting my librarian hat on, the only way the IETF knows how to make material available for the long term is through published RFCs. Unfortunately, there's nothing else we can do for archival purposes. So one way to do it is to simply add this material as an appendix to the document. I'm not saying we must do that, but please consider the long-term implications of having stuff on the wiki.
Okay, well noted. We'll have a look. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a consideration. One of the other things that we've considered with having it outside the document is that as extensions are defined and stuff like that, we would want the schema to be updated based on what's in the registry, and you can't do that without doing a whole RFC publication cycle. So I absolutely understand that that from an IETF perspective, that's the only archive that's available. But on the other hand, this is not quite the same type of document. It's more of an implementer's resource. So I don't know. I think there's good arguments to be made for both parts. Yeah,
one option there might be to have a core JSON schema for your for what is in the doc, and then use a vocabulary for the registry.
Mm-hmm.
So that part ends up being external, but the core vocabulary is internal. With vocabularies and JSON schema, you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
So a quick question for the authors. Do you guys, should we try to get some expert review from I don't know that there is a JSON director or you know, the ability to do things like YAML. You can request expert reviews on YAML stuff and on nibs and stuff. But I don't know. Is there?
I can connect.
I don't know whether you can do it, but
I don't know. Do we just call Tim?
I can connect you with the JSON schema folks.
Well,
Okay.
we can ask. Right?
Yeah, we can ask.
Yeah.
I mean, I figure we just call up Tim Bray and have him say it's fine. All right. But yeah, no, that is another way to approach it as well. Like Fabian mentioned, though, this is a JSON schema is very lengthy and very verbose. It would add many pages to the document, which is a consideration for an already long document. Not necessarily enough to definitely keep it out, but it's a consideration. Okay, on to some more of the functional changes. So previously, our key formats, we had text in there that allowed you to publish keys. When you were sending keys, you could put them in multiple formats as long as they were the same key. But somebody pointed out that the only reason for sending things in multiple formats was that you would expect the receiver to not know all of the formats. And if the receiver doesn't know all of the formats, then the receiver cannot guarantee that all of the keys are the same key. And so this was apparently a very big foot gun that we didn't realize was quite in the spec, which was very simply solved by saying that you can only use one key format per request. And if it's not the right format, or if it's something that the receiver can't understand, then you return an error. One of the, sorry, I forget where I was going with that sentence, but basically, when you're sending a message, you can send it as a JWK, you can send it as a certificate. That key format is still extensible by a registry. So if there are other future formats that people want to do, you can absolutely extend it to do that. If somebody wants to do some weird multi-base key string thing, you could do that. If you wanted to do keys by URI reference, which we are, we've previously discussed, is not in the core document. If somebody wants to do that, we absolutely have a space where that can go, and you're allowed to only have one type of key at a time. Key rotation is probably the biggest new feature, and this is something that we've been stewing on for a long time now. Basically, all tokens in GNAP by default are bound to keys. You can get bearer tokens, but you have to specifically ask for them. And when you have something that's bound to a key, we would like to be able to rotate the key in case the artifact that it's bound to outlives the lifetime of the key itself. Previously, we had been trying to come up with a grand unified way of representing key rotation and stuff like that. But as discussed at the last meeting, we figured out that you pretty much need to have this tied to the specific proofing mechanism. So if you're using HTTP signatures, you need a way to prove that you have access to the old key and access to the new key simultaneously in a way that they're layered on top of each other, so that an attacker can't just take your existing signed message and sign it with their key and say, no, this is the new key. It's totally fine. Trust me. And the way you do that layering is a little complex, but as long as you're following the same pattern, everything works out pretty well. So each proof method defines its own way to do this. The token management API, so when you call for token rotation, this is where key rotation actually shows up inside GNAP. Because everything in GNAP is bound to an access token of some type. So when you're doing grant continuation, the grant continuation is bound to the continuation access token. So if you want to rotate the key for your grant request, you're actually rotating it for the access token, not for the grant. This sort of abstraction and simplification makes it much more consistent how you're managing key rotation throughout the protocol. So what you do is you show up and say, I want to rotate this token and I want to bind it to this new key. We currently have a provision that you provide the previous key at the same time. We're not sure if that's actually necessary because you should be able to look up the old key. So that's kind of a maybe. Like I said, this is brand new functionality, but we think it works out pretty well. And anyway, what you do is you sign the message with the old key and the new key. So for HTTP signatures, for example, HTTP SIG allows multiple signatures on a single HTTP message. So you include the new key in your rotation message, as shown down at the bottom. And then you sign the message with the old key. So you're basically putting a signature around the new key using the old key, which is basically declaring, I, the holder of the old key, am okay with this new key as part of this. But then you also have to sign that signature with the new key to prove that you actually have access to the new key. Because again, we are assuming you are introducing a new key at runtime during this rotation mechanism. Now, there can, of course, be out-of-band rotation mechanisms, but you don't need a protocol to handle that. That's handled out of band. This is for the times when your client instance is saying, I made up a new key and I want it tied to the token. So you prove that you have the old key, you prove that you have the new key, and all of that wraps together. And this is a signal to the AES to say, I need to swap out the key that's bound to this particular access token. Very similar thing with the Jose methods. You put the new key in the message, you sign the outer message with the old key, and then you take that signed object and wrap it in another layer of JWS, because Jose doesn't quite do multiple signatures very cleanly. And then you send that as the signed message. And there's a new JWS object type that's defined in here to signal that this wrapping is taking place. For MTLS, we quite frankly decided to kind of punt on this one because there's no really good way to present multiple client certs in TLS that I'm aware of. I know Acme is working on client certificate identity extensions that might be able to fit into this, but we have not had the TLS expertise to be able to define this. So for now, the course says that this is doing a dynamic rotation for TLS is out of scope, because in a lot of cases, you're going to be using some type of certificate management system to do that rotation in your infrastructure anyway. And if you're not, come make an extension that says how to do that at runtime. Any questions on keys or key rotation before we move on? No one in the queue? All right. All right, cool. So cross-user asynchronous authorization is something that GNAP has been able to do from the beginning, but was never quite fully fleshed out, and we didn't actually have full examples. We set out to do that during this round, and we realized that we were actually missing a core bit of signaling in the protocol. We had a way for the client to say, this is who I think is here right now. This is who I think the identity of the end user using the client software is. We had a way for the client to ask for specific kinds of information about the resource owner. But we did not have a way, as it turned out, for the client to identify who it thought the resource owner was, especially in cases where that person was different from the end user at the client instance. The classical case for this comes from OpenID Connect SIBA, where you have somebody with an authorized piece of software as the resource owner, so the person in a call center, and then you have, the resource owner is the person calling into the call center, and they have, an onboarded official piece of software that the AS can talk to them through. And then you have the end user is the person in the call center that's making the request. So now we have a way to very simply signal using structures that are parallel to the rest of the protocol. Hi, this is who I think is here right now, and this is who I want information about. So AS, go find and ask that person if it's okay for this other person to know who they are. It allows us to very explicitly separate those two parts of the protocol. And so it was an additional bit of syntax, an additional bit of semantics to that, but again, it fits in parallel with everything that was already there dealing with subject information. We also added several examples, including the call center example, to the core document that talk about sort of how this information flows and what an AS would be expected to do in this case. And some of this adds on to the existing discussion we already had about asynchronous authorization. Many of those use cases came from the UMA work and the UMA working group.
Maybe this makes sense in the context of the text, but subject and user, when you see it just like that, seem like very generic words.
Yeah, so subject is who we're asking about, and user is who we think there is.
I understand. The question is whether we can do better for the
right. Yeah.
for the actual format.
No, yeah, I agree. I'm not sure what better terms would be. I'd be open to bike shed some of these terms at even at this point. Subject was named subject because originally that was where you're putting information about what you're requesting, the subject information that you're requesting. So that's also where you put the subject identifier formats and the assertion formats and things like that in your request.
I mean, that's a recognized term, right? Data subject is also the legal term, right?
Right.
And again, if we're bike shedding, then one is data subject, the other is authentication subject.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's not even the authentication subject because the user is who's present at the client, not necessarily who's present at the AS. So, but yeah. All right. So oh, sorry, is there more?
No, I was just going to say that, I mean, it's actually worth noting that that kind of practice is a lot of like cross-media phishing attacks actually use this particular capability of some authentication systems out there, right? So this is kind of this is potentially a gun, right? Aimed at both of your feet. And so I think it is like if this actually goes in there, I think it's, and this is speaking as an individual, I think it has to be accompanied by something in the security section that this is extremely dangerous, and people actually get this is like a major source of fraud in many jurisdictions.
Yeah, I agree. We've got some text in there that we did add in, but it could probably stand to be expanded. Fundamentally, from the protocol's perspective, this capability is indistinguishable from a phishing attack.
Exactly.
Because you're exactly asking for information about somebody else. What this allows us to do, what this syntax allows us to do, is at least detect that this is what's happening, that this is intentionally what's happening. And you can put up enough barriers to make it less likely for that to actually be propagated as a phishing attack. So the AS, for example, can say, like, you're asking for subject information with no interaction and a different user identifier. Well, you better be a pre-registered client with a certificate that I issued. Otherwise, I'm not gonna touch this one. Right. So that's the call center use case. We've pre-provisioned all of these client instances in our call center, and we know that this software is authenticated to a specific user who's allowed to ask for this kind of thing. So it's not perfect, but yeah, we can at least put a safety on the foot gun, to torture that metaphor. Okay, so there were a bunch of small cleanups in the syntax where we had things that were kind of awkwardly defined as it's an object, but sometimes that object isn't an object and stuff like that. We took a step back and realized that we can drastically simplify this by basically taking a page out of the out of JSON schema and similar things and just declaring things in terms of type. So for example, the proofing methods can be sent as either an object or as a string now, except that those need to be defined separately. So the object version has a required field name method, and that is a string that comes from a registry. And then that has required parameters for algorithm and the content digest algorithm. The string version has to define everything, including all parameters, because there's no space to put parameters. It's just a string. So instead of you having to jump through some hoops and saying like, oh, you just put this into the method field and then you default a couple of fields and sort of do that kind of thing. It is instead just very explicitly defined as you do this in this way, and that is the only way that it works. And we did this for access rights previously, key proof methods, interaction start methods, error responses, are all basically use the same kind of pattern throughout the protocol. All right. We have a lot of extended security considerations. Specifically, we wanted to call out referencing the BCPs for key management, and also some informative references from how to manage things in TLS. I'll let you guys go read those. And in particular, the TLS and Utah experts in the room should please go read those bits to make sure that that we actually are referencing those appropriately. And there's other security considerations that were added in there. All right. Client instances have a class identifier. That class identifier allows you to say all of these, to declare all of these instances of software are part of the same sort of piece of software. So it's an app ID in an app store. It's that kind of thing. We clarified the role of class ID in the system. We didn't really change what it was or how it works. We just clarified what it means. So this is something that is decided by the AS. It has to be known to the AS. And it could be pre-registered. It could be issued by a third party. It's really just a hint to the AS that this software is claiming to be part of this class. If you want a greater attestation to the membership of that class, so that attribute actually applies to this, then you need software attestations, which are a layer above and beyond what just a simple class ID string can give you. So we clarified that this is a hint, just like anything else that the client might dynamically send, but the text in there now says a little bit more how to apply that hint, how to use that hint. Oh, and this is the kind of thing that in some cases is really going to act like a browser agent string. So it's just going to be kind of hard-coded in, say, a set-top box and say, I'm this piece of hardware with this version. So you can really trust it about that much without other things strapped to it. Fabienne, did you want to take this?
So as you were saying in the introduction, we've got some work that has been done on the interoperability profiles, and especially on the mandatory to implement. So here it's again guidance for implementers, since we're at a stage where it becomes really stable enough to actually implement it. So you've got two main profiles. The first one is web profile. The second one is secondary profile. Basically, you'll see that most of the methods are actually similar. The main difference, obviously, is there's some case on the web profile where you actually redirect during your interaction, while obviously for a secondary device, your interaction is actually based on a push. So you're actually going to use either a user code or a user code URI, which was discussed, I think, at the previous IETF meeting. So it's basically a different interaction. So you've got both cases which are to be implemented. And then based on that, we actually just define the minimal spec that needs to be implemented so that actually clients and authorization server can actually discuss on a minimal basis. And that concerns everything related to key proofing, the different hash algorithms, the different signatures algorithms, and also the types of subject identifiers. So, for instance, to take this one, we could have said, well, go implement the entire sec event spec, and you need to actually provide email, and you need to also support deeds and so on. But obviously, this comes at a bigger expense for implementers. So we wanted to have something which is common to all implementations of GNAP. And we think that, for instance, the opaque version of it makes sense to be able to communicate between the systems. Same for assertion formats. Currently in the text, we've got ID tokens or SAML v2. Obviously, in the GNAP word and OAuth2 word, ID tokens are very widespread. And so we think it makes sense to have that as a default that can be accepted for authentication on top of the GNAP protocol. So basically, that's really a way to make sure that we can actually understand ourselves in the way. And the last part is a key proofing method, and we suggest that we go for HTTP SIG, which is clearly the most advanced way of making sure that our key proofing is actually implemented correctly. The only downside from that, which was discussed at that point, is obviously it's a new method. It's something new for people to implement, but we also think there's significant upside in making sure that it can be implemented. For instance, what Justin described earlier for MTLS, you've got additional infrastructure to put in place here. It's different. You can actually base that on your HTTP stack only, and that's something we think is worthwhile. So yes, that's something we should obviously discuss together to make sure that this interoperability profile is something that we all agree on, but that's our proposal so far.
Right, and I wanted to say one more thing about the proofing method, because this was brought up in discussion. Even though Jose is itself very well established, applying Jose to an HTTP request in a robust way is not well established. There's a lot of stuff that GNAP had to invent and sort of copy to get that to fit, because Jose and HTTP aren't the best of friends. So I'm bringing that up because that's one thing on the surface that seems like it might have been a more obvious choice to use the Jose methods, but it turns out that there's actually a lot of additional tooling that doesn't exist in toolkits today anyway, so it's not as much of a win as you might think.
Then we also added a section which will be removed when we actually publish the spec, but it's interesting for people to have a resource that's centralized right now and the implementation status. So we actually expect more in the coming weeks. So just for myself, I'm actually working on my Rust implementation, but we'd like to thank all the people that have actually committed to implementing GNAP, or at least a version of GNAP. And you see that there's already quite a bunch of them, either on the client or on the server. And you see that there's also a variety of languages out there. You've got JavaScript, Rust, Java, Python, PHP. We do see that it's actually implementable in pretty much every situation that's common today. So that's really what we want to do. Obviously, we are quite aware there's more to be done on the interoperability side, and we'd like to actually get more. So if you've got your implementation, please let us know, and we'll add that to the draft.
Right, and I just want to add that these are the publicly available implementations. There are a couple of other implementations floating around out there that are part of proprietary products. So Secure Key, which is now Avast, which is now Norton. Did I get that right? Yeah? Okay.
Now.
All right. We're what now? Gent. That's the first. That's the first I've heard that. So whatever this company is called now, the verified.me the verified.me product actually is also an implementation of GNAP, but that's sort of internal proprietary code, and so I couldn't point to it here quite as easily. I don't know if we're actually supposed to include stuff like that in the implementation list. Do you happen to know?
As an author of PCP, whatever it is that specifies this section, yes, absolutely. You can.
All right. So we'll add in the verified.me stuff then as well. And you know, if there are any others, then yeah, please get in touch.
And one more thing, going back to the previous slide, do we have an actual security cryptography justification why we're using two different hash algorithms, or is it just historic? And if it is, why don't we make it SHA-256 for both?
It's historic. I just kind of picked SHA-3 the first time because 3 is bigger than 2, and so it must be better. And I picked that like 3 years ago, and only one person complained, and that's why we made SHA-2 an option, and that's where we are. So if we wanted to make these both SHA-256, I honestly think that that's fine, given the lifetime of the interaction hash is very short. There's not a good reason to do the additional level. So I'm actually fine with that.
I think it'll be easier for implementers, even though we already have so many still.
Yeah. So I know, I just remembered I should put Dimitri's implementation on this list. I totally forgot to do that. Because I know he was the one that actually asked for SHA-256 because he was doing a pure in-browser implementation, and at the time didn't have a SHA-3 in web crypto. So yeah, I'm fine with that. If anybody else has feedback on choosing the hash algorithms, please let us know. All right. So we only have a couple of open issues on the core document now. At least as far as I know, as of this morning, it should only be 2. During the key rotation, somebody pointed out that we forgot to add new errors and forgot to mention this in discovery. Absolutely true. We forgot to do that. So that'll get added in. It's fairly mechanical. It's just getting stuff into the right spaces. Not really a big deal, just an oversight on the editor's part. There's a second sort of more in-depth issue from some researchers actually building on Florian's graduate thesis, as it turns out. And they pointed out, rightfully so, that GNAP is not entirely clear that the subject identifiers coming back are scoped to the AS that is releasing them, even when it's a global identifier like an email address. Which is to say that I can stand up an AS that says that, I am Yaron, and I can have it spit out Yaron's email address for my account, but you need to be able to trust that AS for that specific account in order to actually have that make any sense. Just because it's a global identifier, the fact that I'm asserting it does not mean that I have the right to assert that. This is actually a really, 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 really common thing in federated identity. And in fact, this is completely enshrined in NIST 800-63C, which has extensive discussion about this, which we can reference directly here to say that pretty much if you're getting something back from an AS, you can only believe it as far as that AS told me this. You can't believe it beyond that. There are no globally universal identifiers. And no DIDs don't count.
Justin, just
Yes.
as a historical note, right? For people who remember something called Shibboleth, right? They introduced the notion of scope in 20 years ago to do exactly this, right?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, this is not a new issue. We have some text that already says this, but it's not that strong, and it's not a normative requirement for the client instance to process this with a particular mindset. And so that's why the researchers, in doing their formal modeling, was like, you could run away and get all kinds of users confused if you didn't do this. So yeah, fair point. All right, I think this is our last slide. Yeah. So at this point, Fabian and I have gone through the core document. As you saw, we've been doing a lot of work to fix things up and add in the last handful of features that have been talked about here for the last bit. We think the core document is basically ready. Yeah. Hold off on this?
Yeah.
All right.
Break here.
We will absolutely break here.
Adrian, and then come back to the bigger discussion.
Absolutely makes sense. So, yep.
All right.
So I think that, cool. And so we're going to go to Adrian now?
Yes.
Okay.
Adrian, are you on? He was on. He is on Okay. Thinking, Adrian again. You might just be muted. All right.
Hello.
Yes.
Okay, you're very faint.
We hear you well, Adrian. So
Okay, great. I don't know exactly how much time I have.
Let's
I
say
prepared.
15 minutes.
Okay, that should be plenty. I have 5 slides. Hopefully, I can go through them in less than half that time. And so let's see, how do I present? And share the screen.
yeah, I think you got a request. There you go.
Okay. Are you seeing the slide?
Yes.
Yes.
Miracle. Amazing. Okay. Just slide 2 is a summary of what my point is, that we need a separate human rights consideration, and that some aspects of it might need to be normative in the protocol. The reason is that privacy by itself does not recognize the asymmetry of power between the resource owner, typical individual, and the institutions that are playing the other roles. The concept of free association is discussed at length in the HRPC documents, and how it applies to ASs and RSs and clients, again, is not a discussion we have time for today necessarily, except during the questions, of course. Because privacy does not consider delegation, it ignores the power asymmetry. We now have to consider in the HRPC context of forced association what it is that we are doing and how it can be mitigated. Um, and um, and so the problem, without diving into it, I think is pretty well understood at this point, that forced association in OAuth to the authorization server has a lot of convenience features, but it also comes with scaling problems that cause regulatory issues in the human rights or privacy context. And so my recommendation is that the resource owner must be allowed to state who their preferred authorization server is. Slide 3 is a summary of the privacy interests that have been mentioned in various issues for the past, whatever, how long I've been around. I'm not going to go through them. There's obviously the top issue is who gets to choose the AS. The resource server wants to limit their liability, and the resource owner wants to limit both their lock-in and their various risks of policy surveillance, traffic analysis, spam, etc. And the requesting party, as has been discussed in some issues, wants data minimization, basically, and their ability to choose their client. In a PR that was requested at the last meeting, I suggested two options after discussing this extensively with capabilities experts, 2 and 3. I also added recently, as part of the issue, that it could be as easy as number 1, but number 1 is not easy. It also has issues. And my point is that one of these needs to be a must or a should. And then finally, we have some links around this argument that people can access. They're obvious. There's the PR itself, the HRPC document, which I guess will be discussed tomorrow at exactly the same time, and so I intend to use these slides tomorrow as well. And that's it.
All right, thank you, Adrian. So can we get a show of hands here and in the room who has reviewed the PR, looked at the proposed text? Justin, anybody else? And if anybody online has done that, maybe say so. Fabian has reviewed it, he says on chat. All right, so we actually, I think we need a little bit more review on this to act on it, but I don't know if any of the core editors could step up and give your impressions and sort of feedback.
Hi, Justin Richer speaking. Speaking as editor, one of the problems with the text as proposed is that it places requirements on GNAP as a specification and not on implementers of GNAP. This brings up a lot of very important things that should be considered during deployments, but it needs to be written such that somebody making a deployment decision knows the trade-offs from the human rights perspective about doing different things. So what are the trade-offs, for example, for allowing an end user to specify which AS is associated with which RS? There are very clear security trade-offs for doing that. There are also privacy trade-offs and human rights trade-offs, and this needs to be written in that way and not with normative requirements on GNAP as a specification, as in GNAP must specify this, which is how the text was currently proposed. Fabian has moved a trimmed down and edited version of this to the RS draft because this is a lot about the text was mostly about association between RS and AS and not about sort of client to AS, client to RS stuff that the core document is focused on. So we do think that it's a better fit for that space anyway. But it would need to be written closer to the security and privacy considerations.
Speaking as an individual, I haven't read the PR, so the PR as is may not be appropriate, but I think requiring that the spec should provide capabilities that allow good implementations, I think that makes total sense. Mm-hmm. So I would encourage the editors to look at Adrian's 3 options and see which of them can be reasonably implemented within the current framework, or maybe we should add something to the framework to allow them. Having said that, anything that involves implementers, in my opinion, again, as an individual, should be guidelines, trade-offs, considerations versus normative text.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Fabien,
complement a bit what Justin was saying. Originally, well, first I want to thank Adrian for the contribution, because I think it's an important topic, and I'm going to be able to participate tomorrow at the HPLC meeting as well. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, initially there was a PR on the core draft, and actually moved it to the RS draft. So I think that's already the first discussion to have, is what's the right place for that specific text to be. I do think the RS draft is a better place, because it's really where we've got the requirements on the RS part. And it's also where the actual mitigation can take place, such as delegation for the tokens and stuff like that. Now said that, I think there's remaining work to be done, and we are very open to actually get more feedback on the actual text. Not speaking now as an editor, but just from a personal point of view, I'm really not sure a should, well, a must, I think, is really difficult to implement, and even a should is something, well, when I try to take out the text from Adrian and actually put that into the RS draft as a PR, the actual ways to do that from a practical perspective really depends on the situation. And so that's why, so far, at least in the part I've put, there's no should and no must, because we'd like to, before doing that, at least be sure that something can be done in practice. But that's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, for my part, first of all, I want to thank the editors and the chairs for taking this seriously, and point out that hopefully tomorrow we will see whether GNAP is really the ideal example of a protocol that HRPC and IETF wanted to address by whatever process they had in mind. For this context, as we discuss whether this is an implementation issue or not, I just wanted to make the point, to stress the point that given a choice, we have very good evidence that implementations will not give resource owners this capability. And that is true of any human right. To the extent that it's optional, it does not happen. And the bad thing about that is that regulatory capture in other contexts, outside of our context here, basically denies regulators an opportunity to fix this hyperscaling problem on platforms. So what I'm looking for is, of course, the advice, as was said, of the editors as to whether this can be done and how it can be done. And then
Adrian, your audio dropped out. Now it's back.
There we go.
Okay. And so number one is the discussion that is anticipated as to whether this is possible and how. And then what is the process that sort of the group will use to determine whether it should be a must or a should. Thank you.
All right, I got in the line to make it clear that I'm speaking as an individual. So a couple of comments. I think, Adrian, your point is well made. Maybe not worth repeating that. Like in society as a whole, like free association also comes with cost, right? It's not but we have chosen in society to optimize often, right, for free association and human rights over security considerations. I mean, there are security considerations with free association, and in some cases, regulators actually come down on the side of sort of against free association. But in technology, we've kind of defaulted the other way, because in large part we're allowing, as you put it, hyperscaler to kind of govern what we do. And I think the way to deal with this, or at least in this technology stack, is to make sure that regulators, let's flip this around, to make sure that technology providers cannot hide behind the lack of technical capability to do the right thing. And if regulators choose to point at a particular instance of deployment of technology and say, in this particular instance, we're going to optimize for free association over security, and the technology itself shouldn't sort of place restrictions. The capability should be there. And I think for GNAP, that means that sort of the field should be there, but they don't necessarily have to be the judicious use of sort of normative language will be enough. And we should think about sort of the situations where regulators will come in and say, no, in this particular instance, the deployment of GNAP must follow this particular model and must allow for the resource owner to control their AS, for instance, if that's what kind of this comes down to. So I think let's think carefully about sort of what normative language we put there to make sure that we give regulators kind of maximum opportunity to do their job, which is kind of to govern the deployment of technology in situations where there is sort of where human rights considerations really actually matter. That's it.
Justin Richer, this time speaking as an individual, not as an editor. So one of the things about this, first off, again, echoing Fabian saying, and thanking Adrian for bringing this in. I do think that this is important work, and I remember a time in the IETF where we didn't have privacy consideration sections in our documents. We do now; they're required. And that was a hard shift in thinking for a lot of technology nerds that just wanted to go build protocols for things to talk to each other. So I get that this is a hard shift for a lot of folks. All that said, I think that the considerations being raised around free association and the trade-offs therein, while those are very, very important, we also need to keep in mind that there's more than one solution to providing this. So, for example, one of the things that GNAP has had as a fundamental pillar from the beginning is the ability to get more types of interaction, more types of information, more types of things expressed to the AS by different parties that would allow for a resource owner to externalize their policies and express them to the AS, which then turns that into an access token, without the RS and AS needing to have a loose coupling between each other. So you can still have your RS be a very simple, dumb API that all it does is say, it's a token from somebody that I have been hardwired to trust, and that token is good. And that is a level of abstraction that we know from the technology side is really, really important. Where this really starts to come into play is what the AS knows and what the AS can do. We're no longer in the OAuth 2 world of assuming that somebody has an account that they're logging into the AS to execute something. We can go far beyond that. And that fits with what we've presented many times here, what the editors have presented many times here as the AS as a token factory. That is our model. This factory can take in multiple kinds of inputs. It can take in verifiable credentials. It can take in DID documents. It can take in XACML if you want it to. All of those would be extensions to GNAP. It's protocols built on top of and around GNAP to provide those things to the AS in order for it to be translated to the RS. And in doing that, you could provide the same kinds of human rights considerations, the same types of blindings that are talked about in the PR without having to dissociate the AS and RS in the way that is proposed in Adrian's text. So I want to be very, very sure that we do not limit ourselves and limit, as Leif put, the guidance to regulators to say, only choose this, only choose bring your own AS as the only option in order to fulfill this. What we really want is a system that allows these types of sort of human rights pieces to be addressed and provide guidance on ways that that can be accomplished, and not necessarily a single way to do that.
Thank you, Justin. Darren?
You'll have to forgive me if this is a little naive. This isn't a space I've spent a lot of time in, but the concern I have is you can solve this at a technology problem and make the AS independent, but resource servers make a commitment to the resource owners to protect that data to a certain level, and it's going to be very difficult for resource servers to keep those commitments if they don't have control or they don't have trust of that, the authorization server. And so even if NAP made it possible, I'm not quite sure whether resource servers would be able to continue making those commitments to the resource owners on protecting the data.
To that point, that's also actually turning into a regulatory thing. I mean, we're seeing the EU regulating sort of platform providers to force them to provide sort of externalized mechanisms for data access, et cetera, et cetera. So again, it's not. Yes, you're right. To a certain extent, you have to be able to sort of trust all the components in your system. But again, it's all of that is up to a point. Trust is not absolute, and in a situation where you have regulators saying no, you actually need to be able to provide some externalized mechanism for injecting policy into your own resources, which is happening today, right? That kind of regulation. What I actually, the trust issues may not actually be that absolute. Right? As a resource owner or as a resource server, you may actually have to comply with legislation saying, all right, here's a set of trusted, independently provided resource servers, choose one, right? That's another sort of mechanism for doing that. And what I actually came up to comment was Justin, and yes, GNAP provides a bunch of a certain amount of openness. You just have to make sure that all of those capabilities that you're talking about, Justin, are actually real and can't be sort of configured away easily. So again, I'm all for providing. I think the approach should be to provide maximum amount of technological freedom in implementations, but then allow the regulators to go and tell the resource servers and the authorization servers and that here's how you must behave in this particular context, and that should be possible. We don't want the resource owners or the authorization servers to come back to us and say, no, we can't do it because it's not in the spec.
So I just wanted to close with, I think it's important that we don't conflate the roles here. I think that the borders around what we're calling a resource server in a lot of this discussion is getting fuzzy. And in practice, the thing that the resource owner trusts is a combination of authorization server and resource server. The abstraction of those two components is a technological abstraction, not an ideological one. The authorization server is the component that provides an artifact for access, the access token. And it is the part of the resource protecting ecosystem that does the translation between policy and identity and context into that access token. So I think a lot of this, we're getting hung up on the resource server is this independent thing that somebody actually has an account on and they stored their data on, and that's where they set their policies, and the authorization server is something that's coming in and trying to, like, you know, wedge that open. Whereas what's really the reality out there is that what people think of as the protected resource at large is some combination of authorization server and resource server. In OAuth 1, we called it just the server. It was one component. In OAuth 2, we allowed those to be abstracted, not for ideological reasons, but for technological reasons. People were building distributed systems and we wanted standardized ways to connect those on the wire. GNAP is taking, GNAP as a protocol allows those two to be loosely associated, but also allows the AS to take in more information, like I was saying before, so that you can draw that line in multiple ways, depending on what makes the most sense for your use case. And if we can provide better guidance about what it means when you draw that line in each of these places, then I think we should. And I think that this provides a good motivation for doing that, but it still remains an implementer's choice.
Thank you, Justin. To wrap up this part of the meeting, Adrian, if there's anything you would like to close with?
No, thank you very much. I think this moves to a process question for HRPC tomorrow, and then back to the editors in this group. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Adrian. Justin, back to your slide.
You just put it up on the last slide. That's pretty much all we got. All right, so while that's popping up, basically, the question is, what do we do now? We've been working on GNAP for a couple of years now. We've had a lot of good work and a handful of implementations on it. At this point, the editors think, you know, it's probably time to ship it. It's probably not perfect. It would have been nice to have had, you know, sort of more eyes and more things involved here, more features and things like that. But what we have is pretty solid. And so our proposal as editors is that we take the document, we take the core document, and we move this into working group last call. Fabian and I started looking through the document, and you know, it could use a little bit of an editorial dusting on the text, but we think that conceptually the core document, modulo the missing error messages that we already know about, is ready for a last set of last call reviews. So that's what we would like to do now.
And to clarify, the chairs are fine with that.
So we are actively seeking feedback on that decision from the working group. And if anybody wants to commit to doing a last call review, that would also be very, very good. Everybody's rushing to the mic right now. I can feel it.
Adrian?
Thank you. How would this impact the process by which something might be normatively changed due to human rights considerations?
The editors do not anticipate any normative changes due to the human rights considerations, as was just discussed.
I mean, regardless of where that discussion lands, I think we can deal with it during working group last call. I think what this is not uncommon for working groups that's kind of that has a lot of sort of churn and limited resources, that you kind of need to push it into a working group last call process in order to get people to pay attention at the last minute. So even if it winds up being 2 working group last calls, so be it, right? Yeah, it's better to kind of start working on that and then commit to being done, I think. I wouldn't go so far as to say that there will be absolute, we're sure there's not going to be any normative language in there. I think it's too soon to tell, but I would encourage like everybody to kind of just sprint to the finish.
Right, and to be clear, what I said in case that precision was lost was that the editors do not anticipate any normative changes. There might be, but considering what we've seen and what we've read in the conversations we've had so far, we don't expect there to be any. So that's that. But yes, I agree with Leif that you can change things during last call.
As somebody who's very heavily dependent on OAuth 2 at the moment, but very ignorant of this, as I've just discovered it exists today, I will happily read through it and provide you with feedback as for what that's worth.
Excellent. No, that is worth a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. And for those in the room and those who are not, people have implemented this protocol. If you implemented GNAP, you should have a vested interest in getting this protocol in good shape into publication. So please give it a read. The working group last call is the best chance to get your feedback in.
Yeah, Brent, please tell Farley. Thank you. All right. The next part of this is that, of course, a while ago we split GNAP into 2 main documents. The resource servers draft deals with the association. Sorry, not to go there yet. Okay.
Sorry to interrupt. Do the editors feel that the current version is ready for last call, or would you like to make some, I don't know, minor changes, get it to a more stable place, and then have a working group last call?
Let us get the errors and discovery bits for the open issues that are in there. I don't think that's going to take very long. I may even be able to do it like on the plane. But let us do that, do 1 quick revision, and then I think from there. That's my take on it. Fabian, what do you think?
Yes, same. I think we need to just have a read through. We need to get through that 1 more time just to make sure that everything is on good shape and easy to read for people, and then we can ship that. Yes. So I think I would say next week it should be fine.
Yeah, that sounds fair. I think we can do that.
All right.
So that'll be draft 12 then. That'll end up being. All right, excellent. So the resource service draft. This deals with the association between resource servers and authorization servers. This is where we would have things like the models of access tokens and sort of what these things mean and how you communicate that. This hasn't really received a lot of energy and a lot of attention. This is an open call to the working group. Is there energy in the working group at this point to also push the resource servers draft over the finish line? The editors have spoken, and we would like there to be.
So people in the room and local and remote, are there people here who would be willing to step up and do a review of the resource drafts in its current form to kind of provide the editors with a little bit of feedback on kind of where it needs work?
Yeah, to be.
Well, we have a volunteer. Can I get your name for the record? Darren Miller, thank you. That's much appreciated.
Yeah, to be clear, we know the resource server draft needs work. It has been neglected.
On this and on the last thing, I've asked Norton, Jen, whatever we're called, is happy to continue reviewing.
Okay, could you repeat that name?
Brent Zundell, Jen Digital.
Okay.
All right, fantastic. Like the state of the RS draft is really going to be dependent on the kind of input that we get. As it is right now, it's a very, very drafty draft. But we think there's potential to kind of quickly bring this up in quality and also get this over the line. Ideally, we would love to have the RS draft in a state similar to what core is today by IETF115 Yokohama. It's a little aggressive, but I honestly think it's possible. It's a shorter draft. There's fewer moving parts, but there's more unknown in there right now. So that's why we need more eyes and more hands.
I suggest we have an interim halfway between now and Yokohama, where we look at the situation with the core draft and make a decision on the future of the RS draft.
I think that makes sense. So we would retarget like early January, probably thereabouts.
Mid-January, yeah.
Okay.
Clarifying question: isn't this resource server draft a fairly critical part of actually being able to allow people to do this interoperable AS? And the fact that they can discover AS capabilities is one of the key parts of achieving this human rights requirement.
For the human rights side, yes, because that's about association between the RS and the AS fundamentally. So yes, for that aspect, that's why Fabian moved Adrian's PR with that consideration section to that. So for clarification, I know you said you're new to this space. The core draft is it's really focusing on the client instance and how that talks to the authorization server and how that talks to the resource server. But it's a very sort of client focused draft to how you make those connections. The core draft is intentionally silent on how you connect the RS and AS together. Because by all rights, they could literally be in the same box and reading from the same database, in which case you don't need any interoperable way to connect them. They're just on some internal backplane, and that's how a lot of systems actually work. Modern distributed systems, though, need to have ways to communicate across different nodes. And so that's where you get token introspection, you get structured tokens, and that's where the common token models and things like that, and the discovery of AS capabilities and stuff that the client never ever sees or cares about, that's where that is. And so what we did a while ago was take those considerations, which were all originally just dumped into one big document. We took everything that was about the connection between the RS and the AS and moved that into its own spec. And so any questions about that, about how you deploy that, those belong in that draft. And so that is key to the specific human rights concerns that Adrian has brought up.
Okay. So I think that wraps it.
Yeah, that's all we had. Please read the new draft. There have been quite a few changes in the actual text, and look for the new draft, hopefully in about a week's time.
All right, so thank you, Justin. I think we have a plan for the time period between now and Yokohama. We do expect to meet in Yokohama. Thank you, Lev, and thanks everyone.
All right. Thank you all.
All right, we're wrapped.
We actually have implementations coming out of the woodwork.
Well, I was just looking over our implementation. I saw to my surprise that it seems to be fairly complete.
I'm presenting HP signatures at SAC tomorrow.
Who's working on it?
My team. They're using it for something fairly specific, but they kind of read the spec and did a fairly complete implementation. Just because they could.
Yeah.
Can somebody,
Async and whatnot. It looks pretty good.
What's it written in?
Python.
Python.
Yeah, Python with type extensions. So, well, type Python.
So the signatures presentation tomorrow, I can actually give you a
All right, good.
here in person if you want. It's basically going to be.
And it is running in production.
That's so the goal.
But again, for a fairly very, very specific use case, right? So it's not being used for anything as generic as it GNAP can do, right?
That's honestly the next thing is just to see.
And how do you assess their human rights considerations?
In this case, there really are none because it's actually used to assert a token with like an organizational affiliation that's derived from like non-personal data.
Then security area.
So if you're familiar with how SAML Federation works,
It's the security area.
well, you sometimes use something called SAML metadata to do large mesh federation. So kind of aggregate SAML metadata. And so we have an authorization server that kind of looks at gives you a token based on the your IDP and whether it's actually associated with a particular sort of class of IDPs. So it's kind of like an organizational affiliation token.
Yeah.
It's used for API calls.
Okay, that's an interesting use case.
It's an STS, right? It's a token translator.
Yeah.
But GNAP is perfect for this because it's so configurable. Right? You can use it for almost anything. Simple. Anyway.
So do you think